Russell Anderson as our next speaker. He is the CEO of Anti-Gravitics at the Searle Institute, Searle Foundation. He'll correct my little errors. And he's in charge of the R&D for Searle. They've been around for a long time. They're taking powerful steps in the background, and we're going to learn about things that are absolutely mind-blowing for the next hour. So, Russell Anderson, a warm welcome for Russell.
Thank you for that introduction, and thanks everybody for coming to the Breakthrough Energy Conference here in Hilversum, Holland. Anyway, I've been working with force field propulsion for a long time. I started out with the Biefeld-Brown propulsion effects, and it's been recently confirmed that they're very powerful. They work more efficiently in vacuum, as the inventor T. Townsend Brown found out, and others all around the world. Anyway, I got started researching the effects and technology of Professor John Searle way back in 1986 when I got a book that was compiled by David Hatcher Childress called The Anti-Gravity Handbook, and I found something about Searle's magnetic motor and gravity drive, because what happens, which is very, very interesting, is very magical. When you overload this generator, put too much of a load on it, it will be repelled by the Earth and fly non-aerodynamically. It's very, very interesting. And there's been books written about it. One book that I highly, highly recommend that I first got in 1993, published by team member John Thomas in 1993, is Anti-Gravity, The Dream Made Reality, the story of my boss, John Searle, who's over in Glastonbury, England, across the channel right now. He's working. He's 80 years old. He was born May 2nd, 1932. There's John Thomas on the back. So he invented the Searle effect generator and the Searle levity disk, which we call the inverse gravity vehicle today. And in 2009, January 2009, we published the John Searle Story DVD. Highly recommend that. It's a continuation of the book. And anyway, without further ado, we'll get started with the presentation. Now, see if this clicker will work. Inverse gravity vehicles for our electrodynamic world. And we live in an electrodynamic world, which we're evolving into consciousness of fifth dimensional energies, or raising our consciousness. Professor John R. Searle's all-electric spacecraft and more. Magnetic motors, that's me. I'm the Chief Inverse Gravity Vehicle Engineer for Swallow Command. Go to swallowcommand.com. And I've been working with Professor Searle since 2007. He said, we're impressed with your work. We'd like you to join our team. And I've been in Chief Inverse Gravity Vehicle since then. And in 2010, I was promoted to head of R&D and commander-in-chief of Searle Aerospace Incorporated, which was incorporated in the state of Nevada in 2010. And I also lectured with Professor Searle in 2010 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. www.swallowcommand.com. Recommend you go to that. And I have 60 minutes. I started at 12:23, so I'm going to finish at 13:23. There's a lot of material to go over. I'll go over as fast as possible. I'll be answering questions at the panels all weekend long. Okay, will you believe John Searle? I certainly do, after researching the work for 26 years. There's the DVD. There's a levity disk, what we call now an inverse gravity vehicle, because the disk is repelled, the generator is repelled by a source of gravity. The stronger the source of gravity, the more the repulsion. There I am at Applied Electrogravitics headquarters in southeastern Pennsylvania, United States of America. That's a model of the C-57D starship from the movie Forbidden Planet, 1956 MGM. And behind me is a drawing of Professor Searle's levity disk, or inverse gravity vehicle, Starship Ezekiel. That's the 90-foot manned craft drawn up by J.P. Roos in 1970. That's the diagram behind me. And here I am in Albuquerque, New Mexico at Tesla Tech 2010 with a model of a 1/1 scale model, about 10-foot diameter. That's 2 meters, actually 3 meters, 3 meters of the Searle levity disk or inverse gravity vehicle that I built and brought from southeastern Pennsylvania. Now, let's see. It's a green laser. Right there are the flight cells, flight control cells, we call them, or flight cells, for controlling the flight angle, direction, and speed of the craft in flight. Professor Searle wants clear shells on top and bottom of all the future, current and future radio-controlled models. Clear shells. This area right here would be where the Searle effect generator would go. That's the thing that really flies. The disk body itself is a flight frame for control, because without control, it will be like the first 6 generators financed by the late George Haynes. They will just be simply lost to space. They will be lost in space. They're repelled from the Earth with great force, irresistible force. Up they go, and they're gone, presumably forever. Now, part 1, we'll go to magnetic motors, and we'll talk about electrodynamical helical gears, vortex-based mathematics, and then we'll talk about Searle technology, the solution. Now, John Bendini's magnet. Well, first a little bit about magnets. Magnets are gate pumps for the ether or vacuum or cosmic energy. What I hope you take away from this whole conference is that vacuum itself is energy. It's potential energy, random. We can cohere this energy with certain devices and systems. There's John Bedini's magnetic motor. Let's go back to that for a sec. Those are conventional coils, and they're pulsed at intervals as they're cut by lines of magnetic force, or conductors rather. The coils produce the magnetic force. And here's the Bedini circuit. We have a rotor with permanent magnets, the V-belt for a drive with a cam on it that actuates this switch at intervals. We have a charging battery, photoflash circuit. All this is very familiar if you're into electrical engineering. The diode loop and a coil, a primary and secondary. It's a magnetic circuit which pulses this battery, driving battery, at the resonant frequency of the ions in the battery. That's the key, that's the secret. This will run virtually forever. And since it will, you can tap this for unlimited, limitless electrical energy. Kohei Minato's magnetic motor. This Kohei Minato, there's this magnetic motor, generator and drive circuit in one. There's a diagram of the circuit. Looks like it's from a patent. I believe it is patented. A lot of people say, oh, well, patents don't work. You know, don't depend on that. Well, every patent that I have ever built has worked at least as well as has been claimed. So don't let anybody ever tell you patents don't work. In my experience, they work very, very well indeed. And there's the controversial Parendib motor. By the way, I recommend that any of you who have requisite skills in electrical, magnetic disciplines, you can start to build these, and I recommend that you build them at once. Don't wait. Troy Reed's magnetic motor. Troy Reed powers an automobile, a car, all around the United States with his magnetic motor. So don't let anybody tell you there's no such thing as free energy. There is. If you're ingenious enough, industrious enough, and you don't quit, don't listen to naysayers, you can be having free energy. Be free of the tyranny of oil companies, monopolies, and cartels and utilities. There's his circuit, there's the stator, there's the rotor, Just permanent magnets. That's it. Use rare earth magnets because they won't demagnetize over time. There's George Sukup's V-gate motor. There's a lot of replications on YouTube. It's very easy, very accessible design. Again, use rare earth magnets. There he is. There's the rotor. That's a little dark to see, but you can find diagrams online of that. There's the V-gate. There's the diagram. North Pole, South Pole, North Pole, South Pole, or South Pole, North Pole, I forget. You have to research it. There it is. Again, a rotor and a cam activator that lifts up this repulsion magnet here, repulsion and attraction. All forces act in pairs, so we can utilize electrical forces for electrical motors, electromagnetic motors, or purely magnetic forces, or purely electrostatic forces, as in electrostatic motors. Keep rolling along here because the time is going by very, very fast. There's Bruce De Palma. He's the brother of horror movie, suspense movie director Brian De Palma. This guy's a genius. He expanded on the idea of Faraday's rotating disk generator and found that if you rotate magnets, you can just draw energy right out of the vacuum, right out of the ether. And remember, vacuum is potential energy. I think Wheeler calculated that vacuum has a potential energy of 10 to the 94th grams per cubic centimeter. So that's 10 with 94 zeros on the end of it. So that's the mass equivalent energy. So you can imagine that energy is just stupendous. I think 1 cubic meter of it is calculated to be able to boil off all the Earth's oceans. So you can imagine that's more energy than even an antimatter annihilation explosion. There it is. It's just a, let's see, let me try a red laser. It's light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Acronym LASER. Is the red laser easier to see or the green laser?
Green.
You got it. Green it is. It's easier because the clicker's in here too. Anyway, here's the conductor. That's just a copper disc or a metallic disc. Here are the magnets. Permanent magnet rings you can take out of speakers. So south, north, south, north, south, north, south, north. Here is a rod that you take the power off of, the negative or the positive. Actually, the positive is at the hub, negative is at the rim. And if you mount a regular voltmeter, you can register a voltage outside the disc, but if you mount it on the disc, you won't get any deflection of the needle. That's relativity. So conducting disc, 2 ferrite ring magnets on either side, shaft, and now this configuration draws low voltage and high current, so you can generate magnetic fields with low voltage and high current. That's the way electromagnets work. And Joe Newman, a very famous figure in the free energy magnetic motor field, has had battles with the U.S. Patent Office because they say, well, your motor violates all the conventionally accepted laws of physics. It's impossible. We won't give you a patent. But I first saw his work featured in 1982, 30 years ago, on the CBS Evening News in the United States with Dan Rather. And uses a very long coil with lots and lots of turns. So by the time the pulse comes in, it's going at the speed of light. You can draw free energy from a rotor inside. There's the magnetic field configuration of the coil. Conventional magnetic field. There's a driving battery. Current moves at the speed of light, but the coil is extremely long. And there's the chemical makeup of the ions you can get in the battery. Very interesting magnetic motor. There's Joe Newman. Howard Johnson. Howard Johnson got a patent in 1979 for his magnetic motor. There he is. He died recently, 1919 to 2008. Unsung pioneer, but his work was featured in Popular Mechanics. There's his rotor and stator arrangement. There's Amazing Magnetic Motor by unsung pioneer Howard Johnson. You have the engine stand, low friction ball bearing. There's the stator shaft. There's the rotor. And we have a V-belt around the motor going to a conventional generator. So with this configuration and these special curved conventional magnets, you can get all the free energy you want. No fuel input needed. As we know, magnets are gate pumps for cosmic energy or ether, which is inexhaustible. And here's Johnson's helical wave. Everything in nature is based on helixes and rotating fields. The way air and water, fluids, want to move through the universe is through a cyclical rotation or vortex. It's computer animation. And we have toroidal fields, which are basically the same thing. You find this in nature all the time. I highly recommend a book by, Ilya Prigogine, Order Out of Chaos. 1984, Bantam Books. It talks about how nature exhibits signs of systematized self-organization. And usually the way nature exhibits systematized self-organization is by forming a vortex. You find it everywhere in nature. Hurricanes, tornadoes. There's the Fibonacci spiral. It's a spiral of constantly changing curvature. Ether flux in through the conductor, ether flux out in the reverse polarity on the other side, reverse direction. And you see this everywhere in nature. There's the treble clef. I'm a musician also. I play and teach guitar, keyboards, bass, and cello. The treble clef. There's the spiral. There. There's the bass clef, or F clef. There's F on the second line there. 9-octave cycle, constantly changing curvature. There's Victor Schauberger's from Austria, his work, and his repulsing anti-gravity craft. Now, in the absence of air or water, you have ether, or vacuum. Pure vacuum is energy beyond our wildest dreams. There's a whirlpool, tornado about to form, storm, hurricane is viewed from space, and a spiral galaxy, just like our own Milky Way galaxy. Everything from the micro to the macro wants to form in that way. There's the thunderstorm, here's the tornado. So, Victor Schauberger designed a tornado power generator and a flying machine. Remember, tornadoes can lift anything. 100 tons, 200-ton locomotives are easily lofted into the sky. What happens is there's a zone of anti-gravity at the proboscis of the tornado vortex. Very interesting. Highly recommend everyone study vortex mechanics. So vortex-based mathematics, highly recommend. Find it everywhere in nature. It's how light wants to move in a vacuum. So we figure if light is made up of quanta, or particles called photons, there must be, at a sub-microscopic level, a corkscrew shape on the leading edge of the photon that causes it to corkscrew its way through the vacuum. And in a scope, it would look like a sine wave. DNA, so we're made up of, our cells at the most basic level. So the fingerprint of God, as our fingerprints want to form that way too. The photon model, again, this is very important for understanding what's going on. This is like a toroidal vortex in a magnetic field. This is what's happening. And we also have the unification coil developed by Daniel and Erica Nunez of onestop energies.com. Highly recommend you look at that online. The path of least resistance. is the path of the vortex. So you're not expending energy, the vortex does it for you. Look at the vortex. There's the coil. Highly recommend you go to the website, onestepenergies.com, and look at how that's constructed. Now, it's not a normal coil. Now, normally, magnetic fields, all fields in nature, electrical, magnetic, and gravitational, obey the inverse square law. In other words, the intensity of the field drops off inversely with the square of the distance. But this doesn't happen in this coil. Go out of the room, still have a pretty good field there, pretty good flux. 17 feet from the toroidal source. Look at the needle deflecting still. That's not normal. Something's going on there. Now, electrodynamics and craft construction. With magnetic motors and toroidal vortices, we can construct craft that are not dependent on aerodynamics for lift and propulsion. And therefore, they have many, many advantages over conventional aerospace craft. Now, this craft, it looks like your typical flying saucer or UFO. Form follows function. If you want to have a craft that will utilize force fields, which are really gravitational fields, though all fields are unified and reciprocal and interchangeable in nature, this shape works the best. June 11th, 2002, U.S. patent number 6404089, electrodynamic field generator, issued to Mark Tomian, who died recently, of Star Drive Engineering. This craft swims in a sea of electrons, while vacuum, according to A.P. Dirac and others, Walter Russell will confirm this, is nothing more than pre-electrons. Think of vacuum as pre-electrons, a sea of potential electrons, trillions upon trillions of electrons. The configuration of the craft is negative at the rim, positive at the hub. So you get an interchange of forces just like this, a toroidal vortex that again we see in electromagnetism and coils. So the craft swims in a sea of electrons, which is a vacuum. And there it goes, swimming around. Yeah, my staff did a really great job on this PowerPoint. Kudos to them, Mr. Sam Mason, Kevin Ballmer. You guys are great. There's Tomian's electrodynamic field generator. Here's the craft, you got a patent for it. So negative at the rim, positive at the hub. That is the configuration of electrodynamic vehicles. Look at the work by Victor Schauberger. Look at the work by, oh gosh, many others. Marcel Page. And there's the parts from a patent, pretty complex. There's from the model, so positive at the innermost ring, negative at the periphery. And he studied Professor Searle's craft and Professor Searle's work and said, this is very interesting, I'm going to do this. Now this configuration, this craft produces a great deal of heat. Conversely, Professor Searle's apparatus produces cold, intense cold, numbing cold. And there's a vacuum envelope around the craft. There's no air can come near the craft at these voltages. So 700 volts DC to 660 volts AC power inverter, 288 total required. So it's a 20-foot dynamo. The craft is an electrodynamic generator. There's the coil configuration, primary and secondary. It has a primary heat exchanger of liquid sodium. Simplified power plant design for a 256 megawatt electrodynamic field generator. Net output, 240 megawatts at 94% efficiency. That's pretty darn good. At 132,000 volts AC, alternating current. See the polyphase current. There's a mock-up, a working version of the generator. And Tomian's group is working with us at Searle Aerospace, that's just started recently, to try to get this technology out to people's hands today. Not tomorrow, today. It's all here right now. Rest in peace. God bless you, Mark. 1957 to 2009. He was only 4 years older than myself. There's American Anti-Gravity's logo. Been working and friends with Mr. Tim Ventura for several years. Now, according to a recent American Anti-Gravity interview with Mark Tumian, John's work, this Professor John Searle's work, was indispensable when it came to the hull configuration. I studied John's work for many years. Mark Tumian's patented functional star drive generator, and this is a warp drive generator, no inertia, relies on vacuum electronics to create a dual hemi-toroidal electrostatic discharge, there's that toroidal field again, through electronic means. And the Searle effect generator accomplishes its electrogravitic propulsion through permanent magnetics, Searle magnetics. And I'm here representing Searle Technologies Incorporated, who's our parent company in California. And there's the proud logo of Searle Technologies, the swallow. Seek with all learning, love overrules war. Swallow, swallow command. And that's my specialty, the inverse gravity vehicle or flying disc. And that's me. A couple of years ago, talking to my boss, Professor Searle, who's over in England right now, working very hard to make sure we can have this technology yesterday and today. And he built this technology. 41 flying craft, many SEG magnetic generators, and it works. Now, it's based on this ancient numerical system, which came to Professor Searle in a series of 2 dreams when he was a young boy from age 4 to age 10. And it's a very ancient numerical system based on 2 squared. Well, 2 squared is 4. Now, you know magic squares. If you have numbers sequential, you get all different outputs from the horizontals, the verticals, and the diagonals. But if you randomize the numbers, just like the random energy of the ether or vacuum is going all over the place, randomize them, and the outputs from the horizontals and verticals are all the same, coherent. You're cohering the zero-point energy. So what these squares are is a mathematical relationship, a representation of the complex switching and exchange patterns of matter and energy. Very important to understanding really what's going on with this technology and tangential technologies. There's that light wave photon symbol again, what's going on. In a coil and in the SEG drive and star drive, you have vortex of energy in, vortex of vacuum or space energy in one way and in reverse direction out the other. You can also have cubes. Not just squares, cubes. Now, this is very important to understand what's going on. There are 3 and only 3 groups of squares, switching patterns. Group 1. Group 1 square rotates. All odd numbers belong to this group, so that's half of all numbers are group 1 class. Group 2. Group 2 oscillates. All even numbers that divide exactly by 4 belong. That means half of all even numbers belong to this group. So that oscillates. So group 1 rotates, group 2 oscillates. Group 3 square, that's the one we use for the SEG. Group 3 oscillates, except for the center cross that rotates. Half of all even numbers belong to this group, all even numbers that do not divide exactly by 4. So group 2, all even numbers that divide, all even numbers that divide exactly by 4. Group 3, all even numbers that do not divide exactly by 4. So that oscillates except for the center cross, which rotates. And that rotation is essential to understanding what's going on. Now, if you study the squares, it gives you the exact number of grams, or whatever unit you're using, to fill with volume of generator that you're requesting of the 4 elements. At a level 4 square, 4 elements, you have your 4 elements that you need to get masses of metal and magnetics moving. Very important. Now, what happens when you bring a magnetized, you have 4 elements. The inner element could be a rare earth, has to be a rare earth. That's your electron reservoir. Then you have an insulator of any kind of plastic material, polymer material. Professor Searle was using nylon back in the 40s, and the SEG was first built in 1946 at British Rewinds in London. Now we use Teflon for this layer. Without that, pulses will just build up and then dissipate, build up and then dissipate, instead of having electrons released continuously. You have electron flow. This layer, third layer, is your magnetized layer. That's your electron accelerator. Then you have a copper or aluminum outer layer as a paramagnetics layer. So when you bring a magnetized iron layer, see, all these segments are the same. You have each unit is a separate little generator in itself. Think of the Brewster Palmer drive or system. Neodymium, magnetic layer, it's iron, magnetized, and copper. So what's happening is the magnetic coil that you use to magnetize the iron layers is just a regular DC coil wound with 1 turn of AC on the outside. Very, very important to understand what's happening, because that forms all these little pinpricks of magnetism, north-south, 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 going all the way around. And you have, what happens is you have a sine wave. Whoops, I'll go back to that. You have a sine wave going one way on the plate and a cosine going the other way on the runner. At 90 degrees, they intersect. You get the equivalent of a 2-phase motor. And with electron flux coming off the neodymium being accelerated through each of these lighter elements, that also is a motoring effect. So these rollers or runners are carried along in the troughs of this wave, which runs all around. When you bring a rotor or a rotor magnet set, and they're made up of normally 8 stacked discs, the runners are carried along in the troughs of these sine waves, like an Archimedes water screw. So you have an electron collector, and it collects electrons. The thing about rare earths and neodymium, they have extra electrons in their 4 and 5F band shells. Professor said, all this lovely energy, we want electrons to move. Nobody's using it. Well, in this configuration, it's used. So we have a collector of a rare earth. Neodymium is the cheapest rare earth, and rare earths are not rare. There's mountains of them, places all over the world. You just have to know where to look. So you have a collector, neodymium, rare earths greedily suck up and readily emit electrons. It's a great thing about rare earths. And they won't run out. The universe replaces them, because again, what is vacuum? Pre-electrons. Vacuum is pure energy. You must remember that always. More energy than we can imagine. That's what vacuum is. It isn't nothing. Nature abhors a true vacuum. So, your rare earth, neodymium, your insulator, your accelerator of electrons is magnetized, and your paramagnetics layer. That causes eddy currents between the plates and the runners, so they float over the plate magnets. And no matter what speed they go at, they never fly off. The faster they go, the more the magnetic traction is increased. So, collector, neodymium, gate, Teflon, accelerator, permanent magnetic material, and emitter, copper. Should be 9 at a time here, it goes really fast. There's the field lines of magnetic force. Now, there's a magnetic mock-up unit that we've demonstrated. It's called a single plate and runner gyrocell. That tells us what voltage we need to get everything moving. And it's a very low voltage. It's only about 1.5 volts at 600 milliamps. That's about 4 batteries connected in parallel for normal alkaline batteries. And there it is. On a scope, there's your sine wave. There are coils. Put a voltage on it just to get them running. Very low voltage. And on the true law, these are just magnets. These aren't this isn't the true law of the squares SEG. On the true law of the squares SEG, if you put probes on the inner neodymium layer, that's positive, and the outer copper layer or aluminum layer, which is negative, you will show a voltage deflection on your needle of anywhere from 3 to 14 volts. So that's more than enough EMF to get everything rotating at a very fast speed. And nominal voltage on the SEG is about 100,000 volts. Now, what you have is a field of ions, negative ions, outflowing from the generator when it's rotating. And at higher levels, you'll get a vacuum, constantly expanding. Vacuum envelope is around the craft also when it's in flight in the air. No air can come near it. Anything over 500,000 to 1 million volts, and that's on the very low side of SEG-powered idle. Now, there's an easier to see diagram also. Now, nominal SEG, 3 concentric rings or plates, and 3 concentric sets of runners. Inner runner set must be at least 12, and the runners are made of 8 stacked discs. That's how they work. There's the SEG, Searle effect generator. One of the original free energy generators. I like to think of Professor Searle as the godfather of free energy. He's just an amazing man. Talk to him at length. He's just the nicest, smartest man you'd ever want to meet. There's the SEG for domestic use. You have pickup coils. Now, in any generator, you can either, to generate electricity, either move the magnet field or the conductor to cut lines of magnetic force to generate electricity. This is a converter. This converts the ambient energy that's all around us into usable torque and electricity. All the power you want in our universe. There it is for home use. We can have this. And there's some ferrite SEGs that generate high torque. And there's a letter from Mr. George Eulig, who's a major in the United States Air Force Engineering Division. And it says, one of our Air Force organizations in the States has requested a copy of a report apparently authored by you entitled Disc Shape of Flying Craft. If it's possible to send me a copy of the report at no charge to the government, I would appreciate it. So that's from 1976, 15 June. Oh, there's the flying craft. They were called levity discs way back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Without the disc body, which is a flight frame for control, you will lose the craft to space. The Earth just repels it with irresistible force. There's no way to control it. These flight cells help you control the craft, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. Now, here's a 30, 35 meter flying jet fighter. There's a pilot seat. Discharge pin. Electrons like to be discharged from sharp points, and they adhere to curved surfaces. In this craft configuration, electrodynamic craft, artificial gravity craft, you want to eject electrons from the rim and have them rotate. There are about 2 or 3 different kinds of rotating fields. Now, there's the large version of the SEG, Searle effect generator, on board the craft for clarity. See, what happens when you overload the SEG, and what happens is very, very interesting with this type of magnetic motor. Most, well, really all generators, when you put a load on them, they slow down and heat up. Well, the opposite things happens with the SEG. When you put a load on it, it gets colder, and it speeds up, and it gets lighter, because the electron flux actually flowing radially through the SEG. That doesn't happen in normal systems. It's a condition of negative resistance. Negative resistance produces cold instead of heat. And T. Henry Moray found that out with his converter back in the 1930s and 20s. These are the flight cells, flight control cells. They control the SEG from the outside. Rim discharge pins. 64 struts nominally. Here are the struts. And I think the battery is going in this laser, unfortunately, to use my weaker red one. So 64 struts form the structure of the craft. And there's another cross section. You can see framework very nicely there. I'll try to move along a little faster here. It's a very pleasing to the eye type of aerospace craft. This has no inertia. When it's at flight voltage, which is about 1 teravolt, it's probably a lot more than that. That's 10 to the 12th power volts. Whatever the power level, the current never exceeds 1.5 milliamps. So high energy electrostatics, as we know from subquantum kinetics, is the same thing as a gravity field. There's 1/2 G as measured on board the craft, and no feeling from inside, no matter what maneuvers, violent maneuvers you take. Multi-Mach flips and reversals and right angle turns, no problem. You don't feel a thing. You just feel 1/2 G gravity, half the weight you're suffering right now. There's one of the SEG models that's built, it's a framework, 64 struts. There's somebody working on the Demo 1, I think that's Gordon Goodfellow, working on the Demo 1 40 years ago in Berkshire, England, on land owned by the late Alfred Fleetwood. There's the 21-footer, the Demo 1, the last craft built, Demo 1. There's Tony Justice, Sue Justice, William T. Sherwood, and his wife Rhoda, who were also on team back in the day, 40 years ago. There's the Demo 1 craft with clear shells nearing completion. And that was completed and flown like the 41 other craft before it. This white ring, this is the SEG housing. That's where the 3-ring SEG goes. It's powerful electrostatics. You have a rotating electrostatic field that comes off the rim, rotates electrons around the craft. Some of them are gathered back into the inner surface here. What forms in here is 1/2 G gravitational field. No matter what maneuvers, you don't feel a thing. They deliberately constructed it from the weakest material possible to detract the point that there'd be any forces on it. Once it's at flight voltage, you don't feel a thing, except 1/2 G onboard gravity. And there it is at various stages of construction. It's Professor Searle working on it. 64 struts, 64 flight cells. This is the flight cell area here, then a cold flame barrier on the rim. This is one of the ferrite sections being measured, and it has to be perfect in terms of uniformity. Otherwise, it will not work. Sue Justice standing on the almost completed Demo 1. It's an article from Hanson Burke's Gazette, way back in the day, Professor Searle with a model. No noise, no pollution, no heat, no vibration, no consumption of Earth's oxygen, no need to carry fuel, no runways, no launch pad. We are the tomorrow people, the decision makers, tomorrow's transportation today. This is today's transportation. This is real. This is done. This is the P-11 flying in 1969. It was first flown in 1968. This has one of the really good control systems. Notice these flight cells here are open. You have 4 flight cell modes. Flight cell open, flight cell closed, flight cell open and locked, flight cell closed and locked. And Professor Searle is explaining to a young man from the press how it can stay there, just hang motionless against the wind. And 1968, this is the plan to develop such a vehicle for commercial use for deep space exploration. Who knows what the future may hold? It may still become reality, and it looks more and more like this is going to happen for all of us. This is the exciting reality that awaits us. You got to demand it, though. The P-11 is 10-foot diameter, 2 meters, flying in Warminster, England, 1969. Mr. Searle expects to offer day trips to the moon, and he's serious. It's going to happen. Right now. I think the battery's dead on this thing. Whoops, there we go. Now, there's a photo of a P11 taken from the P12 about a half mile up in Warminster. Let's see. Go through these. I'm running out of time. There's a graphic by our graphics department. There's an IGV, Starship. Starship Ezekiel, Starship Explorer. And these are true starships. Since they have no inertia, anything attached to the SEG and the SEG at flight voltage, it will have no inertia. You keep putting a load on the SEG through a load cell, which is in each of these 64 flight cells. Now, you normally don't need anything in the body to open up, but the FAA says, well, you have to have a power out glide system in case the motor stops, in case the motor packs up. But it doesn't pack up, it doesn't stop. It keeps going. So these will control in a power out glide situation. When they're activated, the flight cells open up, flip 90 degrees to the plane of the body in the SEG, and fires through a solenoid a hard rubber pin at the SEG through a hole in the SEG housing. That causes the whole system to flip at 90 degrees. Well, actually not 90 degrees, at about 7.5 degrees. The flight cells open up 90 degrees from 0 degrees. And if that is maintained, the craft will fly off rapidly in the direction of the tilt. It's the cold flame barrier. And the rim discharge pins. The load cell is directed to the rim discharge pins normally to put the craft in a superconducting state by putting a load on the atmosphere or the surrounding space. And the more load you put on it, on the SEG, the colder and faster it gets. And eventually at 4 Kelvin, the SEG and anything attached to it will lose all inertia and be repelled by the Earth. And because of that repulsion, under flight voltage, it can't crash. It gets close to a building or close to the ground, it just is repelled. And that's what the experiments showed. Now, there is a film clip of the P11 and Professor Searle first standing, then kneeling. That's about 10 foot, 2 meters diameter, flying behind him. Notice, first is tilted down. When the flight cells are opened up on this side, it's the flight cells, and then they're opened up on the other side, and the craft flies off in the other direction to maintain a stable hover behind Professor Searle. So that's about 6 frames shot in rapid succession. It's the closest thing we have to surviving films. BBC took reams and reams, BBC One, of film of the craft and the work of the Searle National Space Research Consortium, or SNSRC. And first in the 1990s, when interest reawakened in the work, they said, well, we want outrageous amounts of money for it. Now they won't even admit that they did films. That insults a lot of people that remember these films that were broadcast on BBC One in England. And there's the P11 behind Professor Searle, the sun shining through some open flight cells. Flying over the Golden Gate Bridge. So, also, if the flight cells are open, this section, or wherever the flight cells are open, reverses polarity. Normally, they're negative. They go positive. And as we know from electrodynamics, this will fly off if this is positive in this direction, while the rest of the disk is negative. That's subquantum kinetics and electrogravity. There's a non-returnable model with SEG inside. Back in the day, neodymium was very inexpensive, and all the other materials. Costs have risen dramatically, and every day that goes by, costs go up. There's the SEG. Professor Searle, the man who saved tomorrow, he's still alive, still working. You can't talk to Thomas Townsend Brown. You can't talk to Otis T. Carr. You can't talk to Nikola Tesla. But you can talk to Professor John Searle. He's in England right now, working very hard. Make sure we have this. Before, would you like to breathe this air and drink this water? Or would you like this? We can have it. Talk to me. Talk to Professor Searle. There's the SEG, your typical flying saucer. Form follows function. If you want to have a device that utilizes artificial gravity and electromagnetic fields for propulsion, this is the shape that's the easiest to make it work. And we see that again and again. There it is, in orbit around Mars. Now, because electrodynamic craft have no inertia, they're immune to the Einsteinian light barrier, and they fulfill all the requirements for the Alcubierre warp bubble. So, this is warp drive. This can easily exceed the speed of light. Professor Searle says they can go right up to the speed of light. But since you don't get heavier, and the craft doesn't get heavier, the faster it goes, it should be as immune to the speed of light as Chuck Yeager in October 1947 with his Bell X-1 rocket plane was immune to the speed of sound. Look at the equations, they look the same. For exceeding the light barriers, exceeding the sound barrier. This is the gift to mankind from men like Nikola Tesla, who first came up with this concept over 100 years ago, and Otis T. Carr, and of course Professor John Searle, Mark Tumian. Thanks, guys. Thanks for all your work, all your hard work. There's the IGV logo, Searle Aerospace Inc. That's my domain. We're going to have a better tomorrow for all right now. I'm going to try to go fast. In loving memory of Nikola Tesla, Mark Tumian, James Howard, Mary Macaluso, BCC, all of the dearly departed advocates of human sustainability. Special thanks to Professor John R. Searle, my boss, Team Searle, Bradley Lockwood Films, SDKM, Ryan H., Kevin Balmer, Daniel and Erica Nunez, Jason, Mark Petrie, Tesla Science Foundation, AmericanAntiGravity.com, and you, the builders and supporters of this movement. Now, if we could go to the film. Might want to kill the lights.
An SEG is a device that converts the energy around you, that's everywhere, into useful energy, what we call electricity.
The generator is a magnetic device that is totally magnetic. It is its own prime mover. It will self-start and continue to run, and as far as we know, we can say never stop.
We have something here that needs to be investigated, and really that's my role. I am a technical investigator of the SEG.
The generator is approximately 2 foot in diameter by about 8 inches high, and it can be put in the home to power your home. It can be put in your automobile to power your automobile.
The British government said they know about it, but they think it's a novelty.
Many of the third world countries have no means of generating electricity. These units could be put in there and power whole communities.
You really have to take a look at each individual component and function. And when you step back, you say, wow, this thing works. There's too much for it. There's too many facets involved not to be something viable.
I felt that the big generators at the power stations were a waste of money, would present to us vast pollution problems in the future. So the whole idea was to get something simple, not difficult to produce, and produce electricity.
With a series of coils attached to it, you can supply a home or an automobile or any device you want that runs on electricity at any voltage or power that you require. This particular device actually emits electrons. It does so through an exchange from a rare earth to lighter elements as it goes out. It's also amplified, and as it comes out you have a tremendous abundance of electrons which are actually pumping into the coils instead of just bumping them forward a notch as a conventional generator would do. The primary component is a rare earth, and it can be, although it can be any of the rare earths, the component that we use is neodymium. That's element number 60 on the periodic chart. And that unit puts out an excess of electrons for some reason, and it will also replenish them very easily.
While I've been playing with this, with equipment, I've uncovered a lot of things which I suspected but couldn't prove. Clearly, the magnetic field was completely different to the magnetic fields we knew of. We got fields at right angles. That's why the whole thing moves. If you have got two fields, it won't move.
As the rollers move, they provoke electrons to migrate from the neodymium to the various layers.
So we know that the magnetic field can be set to perform functions.
The electron flow is accelerated to an extremely high rate, and it creates a vacuum around the device. And in that vacuum, you develop numbing cold. And numbing cold, as we know today, is a function of superconductivity. It also, which has not been known, a function of gravitational force.
The three-seater craft, which we've been asked to do, it will be a 90-foot diameter vehicle.
Here we had something we couldn't understand. It wasn't doing what I wanted. That's what the generator I wanted.
It will dive down in temperature at one point if you build it correctly and actually levitate and actually lift off the Earth, developing its own gravitational field.
This thing wanted to fly. So to me then, the easiest thing was to work on a body, let it fly. And we toyed with this down in Warminster, where we built these, what was labelled UFOs. We called them levity discs. But we built this. Now 13 old age men backed that project, and they only backed me on the following condition, that I did not go commercial with this. They didn't want any problems with taxman. They were doing this for fun. But to me, that was all right. It was giving me a chance to experiment.
We have had at least 41 flight vehicles to date. Yes, they've been tested, and the offer we're now making, we are guaranteeing will fly.
It will weigh roughly 90 tons on completing.
I made it quite clear to them it was not a UFO. The government knows. It's identified. They know what it is. Every government knows what it is. They've known it for years. Here behind me you see an illustration of something similar to the effects that are happening around the Searle effect generator. This energy is all around us. It is like this battery. We have electrons pulled to one end so that we can make them flow in a particular manner. If we take a plate and we make our roller like the battery, but just slightly different, that it takes this energy into this. It will then rotate around this plate. Not only rotate around the plate, it also rotates around its own axis.
This was made for the Washington Conference of Future Energy in Washington DC a few years back. It had no intention of anything moving that wasn't intended. All we wanted to prove that the scientists were wrong. You could get 12 magnetic units to stick on that ring and they would not fall off. We have a plain board here. We got a plate with no power whatsoever. We have a copper outer surface. What we need to do we've got to somehow get power from here to here. First of all, we need rollers. And we'd like the lady to examine for any secret batteries in them.
No batteries.
No batteries?
Nothing but a
Just a lump of metal. What we could do is ask the lady to put the roller units back in. 2, not flying off yet. 3, no flying off. 4, no excitement yet. 10, 11, and the 12th disciple just going in. No launching has taken place. Scientists must be wrong. Now we need to get some voltage across here to find out how much power will it take to make them move, and if they will fly off. We've now got some voltage available. So the lady kindly try to move, see if one will move. Ready for the launching. We're getting there, we're nearly there. And we give it a little bit more push. And we're away, look at them. Can you see them shooting off everywhere? Where are they going? Nobody knows. Are they going to heaven or are they going to hell? Those exclusive roller sets. Good God, they're coming, they're breathing faster than we're losing them. How about that? God, let's see how many we left with. Well, stop the door to the park and we'll see. That's a fast breather. We've still got 12 rollers. How's that? The question here is, there's no power on here. But power must come across there to make that roller set. It can't go that way, you're blowing already fuses. If it went that way, it comes from that way to this way. And that means somebody's wrong. Now, either I'm hallucinating. If I am, I don't know what I've had. I'm not on drugs, and I'm sure the lady's not on drugs, and I'm sure our engineer's not. What we see is motion of metal, and they keep going as long as we can draw power across from that plate to that connector unit here. So, FB and friends, take note. We are happy that you've given us this welcome on the internet, making people look at us, which we are unable to do. My blessing with you, son. Keep it up. There's nothing like it. We are here. Now we'd like to show another interesting effect. Why do we use copper? And you don't know. I'm going to tell you why.
All right, with the lights up. I'll ask for a little audience participation these last few seconds. Do you want free energy? Yeah! I can't hear you. Yeah! Do we want warp-driven starships? Yeah! I can't hear you. Yeah! Wow, that's more like it. We can make that happen. Talk to Professor John Searle. He's over in England right now, working hard. Talk to me and Fernando Vosa. I'm Russell Anderson, representing Searle Technologies Incorporated. Thank you for your time.